In today's episode, we're going to bust the myths about who you think you are and learn how to create who you want to be.
Your someday starts today. It's time to explore and test the newest science, methods, and trends for creating a life you love with your host, Tanyamfk. Welcome to My Designed Life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to My Design Life, where we learn and test the latest science, tips, tools, and strategies for you to create your best life every day. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, at My Design Life Show and at Tanyamfk for our video stream, and on My Design Life Show podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. I'm Tanyamfk, and I am so glad that you're here. Now, if you've ever struggled with personality traits that you wished you could change, this is the episode for you. My guest today is someone that has affected my life directly. As a pupil in his program's 52 Weeks of Momentum and AMP, I have broken through personal barriers of limiting beliefs, changed my lifestyle, and adopted new tools to thrive every day. I stumbled upon him in an article titled Mediocrity is a Virus, which led me to his vault of publications as the #1 writer in the world on Medium.com, and then to his best-selling book, Willpower Doesn't Work. Struggling himself with motivation, feeling stuck in his circumstances, and wishing life was different, he took steps that led him on a journey going from guy playing 15 hours of video games a day and sleeping on a beanbag to PhD in organizational psychology, proud father of 5, and a leader in the movement of self-development and growth. Here today to discuss the myth of this is just who I am and his new book, Personality Isn't Permanent, please welcome Dr. Benjamin Hardy.
Welcome to My Designed Life.
Welcome, Ben.
So grateful to be with you. It's super fun.
Yes, I am so excited. Well, today we are going to talk about personality, what it is, what it isn't, and how we can choose it to create the future we want. But before we dive into that, can you just define what personality is? What are we really talking about here?
Totally. I'm actually going to distinguish it from identity because the two are different concepts and very related. And so basically, I'll just start with identity, actually. Identity is ultimately the story you tell about yourself. It's how you see yourself and it's how you explain yourself. Personality is essentially how you consistently show up in the world. So it's like reflective of your consistent attitudes and behaviors. So identity is a lot more important, to be fully honest with you. Your identity is, for most people, interestingly, really obsessed with the present or the past. And your identity shapes your behavior, which over time becomes your personality. So The more intentional you are about your identity, the more your personality can be the way you want it to be.
And the identity is how you see yourself.
How you see and describe yourself. It's often the story. So actually, if you say I'm an introvert, that is actually more of an identity statement than a personality statement because you're describing yourself. It may actually not be as true in how you actually show up, but it's how you describe yourself. And so it reflects how you're going to show up.
Okay. And so how does that flip to personality? Because I think a lot of people think, well, aren't they the same thing?
No, they're not. Because your personality is more like how you show up. It's like the consistent ways you show up in situations. And so, it's more external, whereas identity is more internal.
Okay.
But what's going on internally shapes what happens externally. So the identity ends up being the driver of personality.
Right. So the personality, are we saying like the behaviors, the
behaviors, your consistent behaviors and attitudes. It's how you just consistently respond to situations. So if you're in a social situation and you are generally more towards an introverted side, you're probably not going to go and talk to people. It's just how you consistently show up in situations.
Right. So
but obviously there's lots of research.
If you identify and say I'm an introvert, then the things that you exhibit outside are going to match that. Not necessarily because that's who you are, but that's because that's what you've identified yourself as, correct?
Yeah. And with personality, it's interesting because obviously you've got like the type-based personality explanations, the Myers-Briggs and stuff like that, which are really extreme, weird views of personality, which actually make black and white identity statements. Like there's actually no such thing as a real introvert or extrovert, but those types of tests, because they categorize you, make you think your personality is more extreme than it really is. Like most people's personalities are actually pretty average. Like I can honestly say my personality is pretty dang average. Like, so the big 5 personality factors, like that's where most of the research is. They would put personality as 5 factors. Like you've got extroversion, conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness to new experiences, and essentially neuroticism, which is like the opposite of emotional stability. So it's like if you've got high neuroticism, you're like not very emotionally developed, which means you'd be pretty reactive in situations. But basically what you would do if you take that test, which I see nothing wrong with, it's funny because we actually had our kids recently take it just to hilariously see how they would respond.
Really?
Yeah, it was super funny. But you know what a bell curve is, right? Like, so like most people are gonna be somewhere in the middle on all of those things. I think I'm like in the 55th percentile, like according to the population on extroversion, meaning I'm pretty average. And that's how most people are. There's very few extreme outliers, and extreme outliers in those senses may actually have mental health issues. And so personality does radically change. All of those things will change from situation to situation. You can intentionally become more extroverted. You can intentionally become more introverted. You can intentionally become more organized and conscientious. You can be more openness to experience. You know, actually what the research shows is that over time, people become less open to new experiences as they age. So they stop putting themselves in new situations, stop learning, stop developing intentionally. And that's obviously it's not required. It's just, that's what happens. So I view personality more as a skill. You can be more extroverted if you want to develop that skill. And obviously if you've got goals in that area, you can become a better speaker. You know, it's just like you can get better at tennis. You can get better with people. You can get better at being more organized. So that's more how I view it.
Behavior, personality. Well, and going with the personality test, and we went a little bit on the introvert, extrovert idea. And I think I've heard you say in other interviews that going into those are almost like similar to the way we stereotype people, whether it's in race or things like that. Like there is definitely a downside to that when we're stereotyping people. All people are like this. And so it's similar with what we're doing with personality. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, it's not too far off from stereotyping in the extreme ways of racism, because, you know, if you overly categorize people, like for example in a business sense, you know, you give people the disc, you know, if this person's not a D, if there's some other score, you may see them a certain way. I mean, I've been you know, unfairly characterized by my score on one of these tests, which I explain in the book. My wife literally almost didn't marry me, and her family saw me as an extremely passive, aloof character because of a profile that I got on the color code, which is just one of these type-based inventories. And so, yeah, if you overly throw people into a box, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's personality, then you then assume that these people are exactly like everyone else in that category.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously there's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now. I mean, you can think that all police officers are killers, which is not actually the case if you throw people into categories. And the more you get to know someone, the more you develop a real relationship with someone, the less they're going to actually reflect some just clear-cut category, and the more they're just going to be a human being with nuance, contradiction. You know, no human being, the more you get to know them, is going to just be one type of person.
Right. Yes, I love it. I mean,
they're very surface level.
Yeah, I think of that even like music. Like, oh, this guy likes punk rock, so he's just kind of a punk rock guy. Or this guy likes hip hop, so he's just a hip hop guy. And then you find out that same person loves, you know, some old country song, and you're like, what? How does that work? And it's because it doesn't fit into one little box. They're so varied. And you guys, I just have to bring that back up. If you didn't catch that, what Ben was saying, he and his wife almost she wasn't going to marry him
literally
because of a personality test. There was so much belief at the time of a personality test, and on that paper, Ben and his wife were not compatible. And so that almost
and
didn't
definitely not
happen.
from like her family background either. You know, like from her family background, and she came from a more affluent, successful family. You know, they wanted her to be married to some like guy who was going to take care of her and be a leader and stuff like that. And from my score on the color code, that was not who they could imagine me being.
Right. Not because of who you were, but because of what was on the test.
Yeah, but the problem is that blinds you, you know, because all you can see is the score on the test. So you can't actually see the person.
And it's
just like racism.
Yes, right. Yes. And there was something you mentioned in the book as well that was really striking, which was about the actual lack of scientific basis that a lot of these personality tests have. I think a lot of us believe that they come from some really well vetted, like, you know, science. Please explain that a little bit. That was so surprising.
So what's interesting is when I was getting my PhD, and I didn't know this, like I was repeatedly told by all my professors, and I had to learn about how science actually works and about how, you know, even psychology works. Like as an undergrad, I thought pretty surface level. But like, as you understand more like the power of context and just how we're shaped, and also just how science works, I was surprised as all of my professors repeatedly said, type-based personality tests like Myers-Briggs are just complete junk science, because for one, personality is in many ways shaped by context. And two, those types of tests are just not structured the way a good scientific measure would be structured. There's not a lot of good backing behind them. What's interesting is that a lot of those tests, Myers-Briggs is one, was developed, I would have to look up the exact date, but it's been many, many years. And there was no scientific backing for the development of the test. But what's also interesting is that the test was, and like the people who created the test, I think they were even like beyond baby boomers. But baby boomers, just as one generation, they grew up in an era that really focused on traits. So like if you look at the leadership theories back in like the early, like the 1920s, 30s, 40s, they were all very like categorized. Like you had to have certain traits in order to be viewed as a leader. First, you had to be a male, you had to be white, you had to be tall, like those were the things. It's like if you weren't those things, you couldn't be a leader from their perspective. And then as you watch the leadership theories develop over time, they stopped being so trait based. You know what I mean? And so like they started being more like, can you do these types of things? Or they became more situation based. And so it's just interesting how when you look at like the history of when these tests were developed and the mindsets of the people who developed these tests, they saw people as black and white. You know what I mean? And so it's just really interesting. But there is no scientific evidence for even a personality type. That's not how personality works. Personality is more contextual. You're going to get a score somewhere on a percentile rank. You can change it. You're not going to be the same exact person in every situation. You're not just one type of person.
Right. Like, and how you feel that day. How you feel the day you took the test. How you
feel in the morning and how you feel at night, right?
Right. And I think there was something where even when they switched the type of person or the person who was conducting the test, that people's results were different, correct?
Totally. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So just depending on, well, here's what's funny is like I recently took the Big Five. Like me and my wife and our 3 older kids, we just took it for fun, And what's great about that test versus other type-based tests is that this test actually has a lot of science behind it. I still take it with a grain of salt because it's far from a perfect theory. But one important aspect of this, and usually most scientifically backed, like really good tests, whether you're studying grit, whether you're studying emotional intelligence, is that the questions are going to be based on what's called a Likert scale. And a Likert scale is basically you'll be asked a question like how much do you love being in social situations? That could be a question. A Likert scale would mean that the questions are on like a 5-point scale, meaning on one end it's completely disagree, on the other end it's completely agree, in the middle it's neutral, and you can answer somewhere in there. Like, so you're not going to say absolutely. You might in that situation, but with most of the type-based kind of more junk science style tests, they'll just give you 4 options, some of maybe which none of them fit, and they'll just force you into a single choice without giving any nuance to your perspective. And so you can't actually have a nuanced score. They'll just give you a bunch of forced choice questions and then throw you into a box.
Yes. I've been on that end. I've been on that end answering. You're like, well, that's not totally a no. It's not totally a yes. And you're like, well, it's either that or somewhat likely or something in between that never feels right. And then you go and make some decisions based on what this personality results have been. So as we're looking at this, I feel we are kind of to recap this. What we're finding is that, personality is how we show up. Like you said, it's not to be confused with identity. It is something different, or they're separate as they do connect.
They're very separate.
Yeah,
but they do relate with each other.
Right, they relate with each other. And what a lot of people are using right now, which are a lot of personality tests, anywhere from the Myers-Briggs and these very real to the what was on the internet today of what type of potato are you? There's all different types because people are searching to try to figure out, to know themselves, I guess.
Yes.
And I've heard, and I think this is actually perhaps in your book as well, that one of the myths is that our personality is our true authentic self. That's a belief, that's a myth, that people believe is that, well, the personality is just who you are. And you'll hear that so often, well, that's just the way I am. That's just the way I am, man. That's just how I work. That's just how this goes. And so as we move into even just the title of the book, Personality Isn't Permanent, I think that's the first thing we're learning is that it's not just who you are. And I actually just came across a show on NPR back from 2016 called The Personality Myth. And the show opened up with the reporter going through a line of people going in to get their marriage license. And she was asking them to describe each other's personalities. And they actually went through and were describing these ideas. And then they said, do you think that would change? And pretty much 90% of them were like, no, I mean, your views on things might change, but I think the core of your personality is who you are. And having read your book, I was like, I think Dr. Hardy has some different things and opinions on that. And so as we're kind of rocking people's world to go, hey, this idea of who you think you are is not necessarily what you're stuck with. It's not really actually who you are, because the identity is something else. So if they're listening to us and they're going, okay, you guys are totally confused me. I thought this is what I was. What is true? What is it that we do know now is what we are, and how we work with this and how we develop something different?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people change throughout the course of their lifetime. Lots of research on that. Like there's what's called longitudinal research, where people are like given personality profiles or tests when they're like 15 years old and given tests again by age like 70. Like they've now done research that far. And like basically what the research shows is that you're going to get totally different scores throughout your life. Back to me and my wife, just as a quick example, and then I'll kind of break. We'll get to a point where we're pretty clear on this. Before I submitted my responses on my Big Five personality test, I showed them to her, because as soon as I hit respond, all she would see is my scores on my percentile ranks for those 5. But I wanted to actually show her how I responded to like the 25 questions and just get her opinion. And she did say on one of them, this is totally off. Like, you're actually right there. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But then she didn't give me any other opinions. We pushed submit. And then she was like, I wouldn't have answered how you did on some of those, but I can tell that you were answering based on how you saw yourself. Right. And so that's a clear sign that like how we see ourselves determines how we respond to those tests, and also maybe why we're taking the test in the first place. If you're trying to get a job, you're probably going to answer it in various ways to try to show up a certain way on your outcome. And it's hilarious watching our 3 kids answer them. Our daughter, who I love her so much, she still has quite a bit of emotional challenges from, the fact that we adopted her from, she scored in the 95th percentile in emotional stability. She scored, she was really smart at saying I'm brilliant emotionally.
Amazing.
Anyways, as far as who we are and like your core authentic self, I really like what Adam Grant says. Adam Grant is a Wharton professor. He's a psychologist. He's written several best-selling books. He's just a smart guy. I really like him. He gave a great commencement speech where he talked about this. He talked about authenticity and about how often the idea of being your true authentic self or being true to yourself can get in the way of growth. I think when people say my authentic self, they're usually talking about their feelings. They're talking about how they feel about themselves. So if something feels comfortable and natural, that probably feels authentic. Whereas if something feels awkward or scary or unsafe, it feels unauthentic. And so they probably shouldn't do it. And that's kind of based on a pain and pleasure model of viewing the world, where you should only do things that are pleasurable or feel natural, and you should avoid anything that feels unnatural or uncomfortable. From that perspective, parenting is very inauthentic to me. It's very difficult. I'm learning and I'm getting better. But when we first got our 3 foster kids, very difficult. I had to learn to identify as a parent and learn to invest in it and learn to want it and learn to love the 3 children who we ended up adopting. Our 2 younger twins, who are now 18 months old, we live in Florida. They're becoming very good at swimming. But like 4 or 5 months ago, when we first started lessons, very inauthentic to them. Like, they were horrible swimmers and they cried a lot and they hated it. Now they're brilliant swimmers. Now they jump in the pool. Now we have to watch because they're jumping in. And so what Grant says is, and he explains in his commencement speech, which really recommend, he gave it at Utah State, is he said that if you're really obsessed with the idea of authenticity, it will usually get in the way of growth because you're overly obsessed with who you think you are today. And you're really trying to define yourself based on what feels comfortable and what feels safe. And he then went on to explain a story of how when he was a graduate student, he was doing a lecture. He volunteered to teach one of his colleagues' class. And he said he was so nervous, it was so awkward that even the students were shaking in their seats. But he then said he was going to go against being true to his authentic self, and instead he was going to be authentic to the person he genuinely wanted to be, which was that he wanted to become a good speaker. So then he went through the process of creating a future version of himself that could speak, and he then went through the deliberate practice process of actually putting himself through the learning process. And so he just said, rather than being authentic to the person I was trying to be true to the person I genuinely wanted to be. And I think that that's a better approach, is who's the person you really want to be. They say that the number one deathbed regret is that people don't have the courage to be the person they want to be. Instead, I think they live in the safe zone of their comfort zone. And I prefer looking at personality and comfort zone as pretty much the same thing. Going outside your comfort zone is going to slightly feel inauthentic, but that's where growth is.
Right.
And so it shouldn't be based on how you feel, because if you do everything based on how you feel in the moment, often your current preferences are going to be to the detriment of your future self. Sometimes my current preferences are just to not get out of bed, to freaking eat a bag of donuts, and to just chill on Facebook all day. But my current preferences or feelings can often be to the detriment of my future outcomes.
Absolutely. And so being clear on who you want to be, as opposed
being
to
intentional and clear
yes.
and choosing who you want to be.
Yes. And I think you mentioned it somewhere too, that a lot of these tests and personality tests, or even the current maybe psychology model or therapy model, I'm not sure exactly how it was put, but it kind of focuses on our past and how it's brought us
Hugely.
up. Yeah, so it focuses on our past, and then we spend our time trying to figure out how we got to where we are, as opposed to trying to figure out who we want to be moving forward. So we try to undo all these things. And I thought this was so interesting, and you brought this up as well, was that you do that. So you're either trying to go, how did I get here? Got to figure that out. Got to figure out the past. How did I get here? Or we go, well, now I got to create an environment that fits around this personality. So if I'm introverted, I need to make sure that everything's kind of introvert proof around me to be okay. I have to make sure everyone knows I'm introverted, say, this is how I need to function. And I can see how that can be absolutely limiting as well. So it sounds like that first real step is we can look at those things, but really they almost become obsolete when we need to be focusing forward to say, well, who do you want to be?
Yeah. Catherine Briggs, actually, the person who initially developed the Myers-Briggs, viewed people as hardwired at birth. And so she believed if you were, let's just say, shy, that the world should account for your shyness, and you shouldn't be required to change. The world around you should fold to that. If you're angry or if you're a criminal, we should all account for your behavior rather than you adjusting to becoming a better human being. But yeah, Viktor Frankl, actually, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, who's brilliant. It's such a good book. It's revolutionary for psychology. He really explains that the future is really where a person is really what matters. So like he talked about how in the Holocaust, as an example, when a person lost hope and purpose for their future, the present became meaningless. And so like in the Holocaust, the suffering became too unbearable and they fell apart and they died. And so you really need a sense of future and a sense of purpose to give your present self context and direction. And what Frankel's, and by the way, he contrasted himself against Freud, and Freud was obsessed with the past and obsessed with like childhood, sexuality and stuff like that. So like Freud's theories versus Frankel's, I'm much more of a fan of Frankl. I think there's some interesting aspects of Freud, but I like Frankl better. And I think Frankel's far more practical, I think he's a more clear-headed thinker. He went through a lot harder experiences and he thrived. And
he came out the other side thriving.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
I think everyone, if he decided to have completely lost his mind, everyone would have given him a pass, which doesn't help him. But we go, oh yeah, we get it. He went through a lot, but he instead, not only did he not go that route, but he thrived. I mean, he went beyond that. I mean, just through circumstances you just can't even imagine. If you guys have not read this book, like this is a
you've read Man's Search for Meaning, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's just brilliant.
But Frankl said something super interesting. He said one thing. He said, what man needs is not a tensionless state. Instead, what he needs, or she, is the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. And that's what's really key is that most people, they're looking for their purpose or they're looking for their personality. They're trying to discover it. And what Frankl said was so simple. He said it's a freely chosen task. So like I of myself have chosen to make my freely chosen task writing this book. That was a freely chosen task. I didn't discover that I was a writer. I chose it. I didn't discover that I wanted to be a parent. We went and decided to sign up and become foster parents. Like, we decided a freely chosen task that gave our life meaning, that then gives us something to strive and struggle for. And it reminds me of the Dan Sullivan quote. You know, he says, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. You have to actually clarify your future self so that then you can engage in a process that can lead you to developing yourself, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and becoming flexible and competent as a human being, rather than overly defining your comfort zone and saying, this is who I am, therefore I can only do things that fit me. And I therefore should only find that perfect soulmate who perfectly fits me.
Right.
And it's a very passive way of looking at life. And, you know, if you're overly passive, you're more likely to become depressed. If you're overly passive, you're not likely to create peak experiences, which are obviously big developmental learning experiences. You need to be intentional and courageous and be seeking specific goals in order to learn and develop in a really powerful way.
Yeah, that is huge. Just knowing, knowing who we are, who we want to be, and not taking that as an end all be all as well. Because even through the choice of you saying, I'm going to write a book, there were things that happen along the way through that path that develop in its own, different collaborations, different situations.
Totally.
But you had to make the choice. And I'm a firm believer. It's one of the big things that my followers know I say all the time is I say there's no such thing as life purpose. It's not this thing that you go and discover some magical thing. And then once you do it, all of a sudden it's sunshine and rainbows. That's why somebody who discovers they love yoga and then goes, that must be what I'm meant to do. So then they go and start a yoga practice and then they find themselves miserable and go, what happened? It doesn't work like that. And making an intent choice and then seeing what happens along the way and being clear who you want to be. And that's the thing I think I want to dive into a little bit too, is that who. What kind of decisions are we looking at when we're saying who we want to be? If we're stuck, or we think we're stuck in this, I'm just an introvert, I'm the kind of person that does this right now, how can I choose to be someone else? How do we get past that? And then also make sure we want to go a little bit into the trauma, as you did talk about that as well, because I think that's a huge thing where people go, bringing up Viktor Frankl, we can go, well, look what I've been through, how can I do this with what I've been through? So we can go into that a little bit.
Yeah. I'll try to blend them all together. So one thing that's interesting about trauma, and a lot of this comes from the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is kind of the definitive book on trauma, which is so good. And that book really pushed me to write my book. Yes. But
that's an intense book. Yes, that's an intense book. There's a lot there, guys. If you want to understand how psychology works more, that was an eye-opener for me, even just how the system itself works, psychology, the diagnoses. It really reveals a lot, doesn't it? Whew. It's a messy system. It's far from a perfect system. I'm definitely a critic of the system, having gone through it. Yeah, it was intense. That's an eye-opener. And it helps, guys, if you're curious, you're like, well, I don't need to know the system. It touches all different points. It helps in just the understanding of what the body keeps score, what happens in your body, what happens in your mindset, but also it's very eye-opening to the whole industry and how it works. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's super important to understand about trauma, because often people, when they think about trauma, is they think it must be something extreme, like war or rape or something like that. But trauma is obviously that as well, but it could be just being told you're bad at math and genuinely believing it. So trauma is big and small. It's any negative emotional experience that impacts your identity. So it leads you to believing something limiting about yourself, which then stops you from having a hope and purpose in your future. So that's one of the big things that Bessel found, who wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score, is that trauma often shatters hope and flexibility and imagination in the future. And kind of connecting that with future self, Daniel Gilbert, who's a Harvard psychologist who spent so much time studying this subject, he talks a lot about how one of the major reasons why people don't predict their futures because they spend very little time imagining their future self. Yes. They spend way more time remembering the past, thinking about who they are in the past, and overly defining themselves in the present. Like if you say I'm an introvert, as an example, you're talking about who you are today. You're not talking about who you think you're going to be in the future. And if you overly label and obsess on your current self, you're going to be far less imaginative about a different future self. You're not going to see that your future self could be different. And you
start to defend that label.
Yeah. Big.
You start to defend that label.
That's one of the things James Clear, James Clear said this in Atomic Habits, but it's just so true, is that the more sacred an idea is to you, or the more it's an aspect of your identity, the more likely you're going to defend it against criticism. You're going to try to justify it. You're also going to try to confirm it. And so
Yeah.
you're going to prove it. You're going to say, I am this person. And then you're going to engage in behaviors that are going to prove that. We very much like to be consistent with the stories we tell about ourselves.
Right. Even to our detriment.
Hugely. Yeah. And so what I think a core point of all of this is that your current self is actually so temporary because you're not the same person as you were in the past. And that's actually a healthy way of reframing trauma, is to realize you're first off not the same person you were in the past, but also you can choose different meanings for your former experiences.
Yes.
The experiences that were so negative, you have to realize they're negative because of the meaning that you gave to them. Yes, they were negative because of the emotional impact, but usually with a negative emotion, you form what's called a cognitive commitment. You form a story about who you are and about what the world is because of your negative emotions. And you can go back and reframe those, and you can choose different and better meanings. You can choose to view a negative experience as, this was a positive thing. This actually helped me. And that's crucial to understanding trauma, is that it's a meaning and it's a perspective. You know, there's a really good quote that's attributed to Gandhi, but he said, I cried when I had no shoes until I saw the person who had no feet.
Right.
You know? And so what that says is that having no shoes is a meaning. You're crying about it until you have a different perspective. And then you realize maybe it's not that bad. And maybe it could actually be a good thing, you know, and you can choose to view any former experience as a positive experience. And as you develop as a person, that's probably what you should and want to do if you want to get the most out of your experiences, as try to look for how this thing can help me. What can I get out of this? How can I use this? Rather than, oh, this happened, therefore I can't do anything.
Right. And using that as a
trauma
label
can really impact your imagination. It can stop you from hoping in the future. And again, as Frankl said, hope and imagination, hope and having a sense of chosen purpose for your future is literally essential to functioning as a human being. And so you need to choose it. You need to choose a future worth striving for and not be so caught up in who you think you are today. Anyone with a growth mindset, from Carol Dweck's perspective, is not defined by who they are today. Having a fixed mindset means that who you are right now is who you're always going to be. So if I fail this book launch, as an example, that means that that's just where Benjamin Hardy is and where he'll always be. Therefore, this is where I'm at. And so I am who I am right now, and I'm defined by this exact moment in time. That's the fixed mindset. Whereas a growth mindset does not really care who you are today. Instead, you're focused on where you can go. And that's more the direction of your identity. That's more the direction of your story. And that's more the direction of your behavior. And that's where you can then start literally doing things like morning routines, where you start journaling and visualizing your future and then acting intentionally versus being on autopilot, where you're just subconsciously living based on your current identity or your former identity and what your environment has triggered you or addicted you to be.
Right. Oh, that's fire.
You want to be intentional on a daily basis, which is why
Yes.
I think morning routines are so great, because you can project your future self and then activate that so that you can actually do some stuff today that pulls you forward. And that's really the ultimate goal, is that the future is the thing predicting your behavior, not the past. But for most people, the past is the ultimate predictor of the future because they're not spending that much time imagining and then actively chasing their future self.
Yes. Well, and I say this a lot, is these aren't the questions that we get asked at cocktail parties. People aren't like, hey, have you thought,
who's your future self?
Yeah, who's your future self? Who do you want to be next week? Who do you want to be next month? You know, and I've actually I do worksheets for these kind of things all the time. I have my AM PM routines. Any listener on our show knows that's my thing. I love my 4 a.m. wake ups, and I got my routines. Yeah. Woo, yeah, love it. Never thought I would be a person to go up that early, but it is so foundational. Peak state is what it's all about. Always revisiting my goals, doing those things, and really putting that vision into who you want to be and what you want to be, and filling those out, understanding who it is. And one of the things, there's so many things that you just brought out. It reminded me in my own situation when I became a widow at age 25. I had a lot of support, and we had about 6 months during his passing. So it was a slow in some ways process. It wasn't hit by a car or something. But fast in a lot of other ways. But we had time to process it together. And when he passed away, at the urge of family, they said, will you go to a grief kind of group, support group?
Totally.
Yeah. And so I did that. And I had really been doing a lot of inner work at that time as well. And so I showed up there, and what you would expect at a grief group, there was a lot of grief going on, and people were obviously not, joyous. And I kind of sat there just taking it all in as the new person. And there was a lady there who was breaking down in tears and going, it's just so hard. It's so hard. And, of course you're feeling for them and kind of in this situation. And she's like, yeah, I just, it's been 10 years. And then that was all I heard. I just tuned out. I was like, 10 years. This is not where I want to be in 10 years. Feeling that kind of pain and seeing myself as the widow, the person who lost the husband at 25. And that's how it felt for a while. I'd walk into a party and I used to joke that it felt like the record would skip, and stop and be like, oh, Tanya's here. Like, everyone act different. Stop acting so happy. We want to, and you felt like this odd person. I was like, that's not where it's at. And so if that, at the time I was like, if this is what, grief counseling does, I want no part of it. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad situation. Maybe I just wasn't a good group, but that identity was so there. And it was a choice that I don't know how to be a widow. I don't know what the next step is, but I was starting to figure out what I didn't want. And I started to go, I want this to be something where I'm inspired by this change in my life, that I can talk to others. And I searched, I thought, so do I become like a cancer spokesperson? Because that's what a lot of widows of cancer tend to do. And I didn't feel led to that, but I started asking the questions. And I think that's my point, is that it's unfortunately too often in life, it's through these tragedies and traumas where we finally ask the question. And something,
definitely.
and something like a book like yours gives us the opportunity to show up wherever we're at. We don't have to have the tragedy and the trauma to necessarily be the only inspiration. We can read something like this and go, you know what? Even right now, maybe I'm a little more couch potato than I want. I can start making a choice of who I want to be. And I think that's what's so important with what you've given in this book and the steps in this book about making the choice, asking the questions. You've given a ton of examples about from people who have made these kind of changes and taken these steps and doing something as simple as a morning routine. So I don't want to get too preachy on that, but it threw me that you said so many things.
Big. Well, you remind me of my wife, because she was in an extreme, and although, she was not a widow, she was in an extremely abusive marriage for 3 years. And it was so bad. When she came out of it, everyone was kind of on eggshells around her, because like they didn't know how to identify with her. They didn't know how to relate to her. And they were, and she just like made light of it. Like she brought it up. Like she tried not to make it so extreme, and she just wanted to move on. And she did move on extremely. But she didn't want to stay in that situation or in that identity. And so she quickly just brought it up, and she had strong conversations, and also, to some degree even trivialized it in the beginning, just to kind of make people feel like normal around her. And she just didn't want to get stuck there.
Yes.
But people can get stuck in that, and then it becomes their comfort zone. It becomes their story. It becomes their identity, and it becomes just kind of like their way of being, whatever it may be.
Yes.
Anything that occurred in our past can really just be a safe zone for us, even though it's clearly not helping us.
Even if it's something we're not happy about, I have a background in clinical.
Into it. This is who I am now.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say I have a background in clinical immunology, and we would have a lot of patients that would just so identify with their illness. And it was the very thing that they hated thinking about. It was like, this is the worst thing in my life. But it was who they were. They were no longer the person. They were the person with this. They were a sufferer of this. And that became who they were and everything they were about. And it was everything they said they didn't want, but it just became that identity. And so looking at our future and who we want to be, that's how we can break away from that.
Well, what you focus on expands. I'm a big believer that you should focus on what you want versus focusing on what you don't want. You know what I mean? In psychology, we call it approach or avoid. You can be trying to avoid various things. And if you spend all your time focusing on what you're trying to avoid, then what's your life about? It's about not going backwards. Where if you're focusing on what you want to create, then you're on offense. You're actually moving your life forward, and you're focusing on the things you want more of in your life. And it's interesting whenever people can very clearly say what they don't want, but they've never actually, many often haven't taken the time to just choose what they do want. What kind of relationship do you want? What kind of environment do you want? What kind of day-to-day life do you want? How do you want to feel? Actually just define out. your future self and make that what you focus on, so that then you can design your, identity around that. But also you can, focus your attention. In psychology we call it selective attention, but you only see what is relevant to you. And
Right.
it's our duty, if you want to create the life you want, to train your brain to find what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You
That's
can train your brain to,
the old, like, if you see a car, you're going to buy a
yeah,
car,
exactly.
and then all of a sudden you see it everywhere. Well, it didn't change. Life didn't change, and all of a sudden that car appeared. It was always there. Your brain has just now been trained to look for it because that's what you've told
Yeah,
it to focus on.
and you can do that by actually writing down your goals, by
Yes.
educating yourself. You can notice things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed because our brains just don't have time. And you can do that through visualization, through writing things down, through telling people what you want. Then you can start to actually see it all over the place. And then you train your focus, you train your attention, which I I encourage everyone to do, is train your attention, because otherwise it will be hijacked by the crazy world we live in.
Yes, yes. Well, and that's, I think, the thing is there are specific steps that you can take to move into this new chapter. So as you're listening to this and you're going, okay, so we understand that this idea of personality wasn't what I thought. It wasn't just who I am, which I think can scare a lot of people, because that,
it puts responsibility in your hands.
Yes, right. All of a sudden you're like,
that you have choices to make, and that you ultimately are creating yourself.
It's up to me. Well, and hence the name of the show, My Designed Life, is that, that's exactly what we're doing here. You get to design it.
It's beautiful.
By so many of ours, your background, I know, as rough, and a father that, had addiction issues and all these different situations. I came from extreme poverty. Living in, grew up in homeless shelters, all these type of things. We can look at that and have that define us and say, well, people like us don't get to do things like that, whatever that is. And having that time to sit and make conscious choices and go, this is actually who I want to be. This is the parent I want to be. This is the kind of wife I want to be, or husband I want to be. This is the kind of person I want to show up as in my career. Just taking the time to have that vision, taking the time to, as I mentioned earlier, I love my worksheet. So just actually writing it down. It's not homework. We don't get that homework usually. That's not given to us. And so as simple as taking that time to think about it, to go, how do I want to show up? Just because you show up maybe as the nagging person or the upset one, or I'm the kind of person who yells in traffic. I come from California, so that's a tendency we tend to have as Californians. We're just like, traffic sets us off. But is that who I want to be? And have you asked yourself that? Have you looked at that? And I think that's just, it sounds almost too simple, but it's really all it takes a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, I think Daniel Gilbert was right. He said most people just don't spend that much time imagining their future self. And I think that that's a good question for anyone listening to this, is how much time do you actually spend thinking about your future self, imagining it, and strategizing how to actually get there, and maybe getting mentors, investing in environments or education to become that. Like, you very much can create situations and scenarios that are amazing. I mean, if I knew that if I wanted to go live in the Caribbean, I could go do that. If I wanted to go live in Europe, I could go do that. If I want to be a professional author, I could go do that. Like, it's about training yourself to develop into the person you want to be and creating the situations you want. I mean, there's a very good old school book that I'd invite people to listen to if this is like new thinking. And that's the book As a Man Thinketh. Have you ever read that old school book?
Yes. I have.
Yeah, that's just like literally talking about the garden of your mind, like what you plant flowers, and so it's like your thoughts train, they turn into circumstances and character. Your thoughts literally turn into who you are as a person. And so the point of journaling and framing out your future self is that you're being very intentional about the thoughts that you're, the seeds that you're harvesting into who you become, and so you might as well train your brain and train yourself and be decisive and intentional about the type of person you want to have and the situation you want to have. And it's your choice what you ultimately pursue, but the things you pursue are the things shaping your identity. The things you're ultimately deciding you want are the things that are driving how you see yourself. And that's the thing that's showing up in your world. And so maybe I would encourage you to ask yourself, why did you decide that whatever it is you're currently pursuing, even if it's just getting by, or whatever it is, fitting in with this group, why did you decide that this was the thing that you were going to be, and put your attention towards? You can choose anything.
Yeah.
You can choose literally a relationship with God. You can choose no relationship with God. You can choose, being a millionaire. You can choose. I mean, you have to literally just think about what is it that you want. And that might require developing some values and getting a lot of education and seeing the world so that you can ultimately make informed decisions. And the more exposure you get, the more knowledge you get, the more confidence you build, the better decisions you can make, which again kind of points to the idea that your current self doesn't really matter that much. And you can look at your former self and you can see that your former self made decisions that your current self no longer has interest in or would tolerate. And your future self is the same. You know, the more education, experience, confidence you build, the more better decisions your future self will make that you currently just aren't making, which is totally great. It's awesome because we're constantly in a state of growing and developing, and it's our choice to the extent we want to grow and develop.
Yeah, I think there's a quote that is, every action you take was perfectly designed to get you exactly where you are right now. So it's like you may not have consciously thought about those actions, but where you are is a result of all those choices that you made.
Totally.
And perfect synchronicity to be exactly where you are. So if
you could have been in a million different places.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times
you
we're
weren't
doing it by
destined to be here. You chose to be here through your choices and actions, and also through stuff that happened in life, and through when you were born, etc.
And I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. And I know we'll get close to wrapping up here, but that statement that you said was so powerful. And you said, if I want to live in the Caribbean, go live in the Caribbean. If I want to do this, I can go do this. And for myself, someone who my family and I traveled full time for almost 4 years. My 4-year-old just finished his 33rd flight not that long ago. And so I hear all the time, like, I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that. And I also get a lot of the messages now, I live vicariously through you. And it stabs me every time. Like, there is no need to live vicariously. I didn't do that. I didn't get this because I have some, gold bricks in the bank. I made a deliberate choice to say, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to live. I want to travel. I want to go do these things. And so we lived in Thailand. We lived in Bali. We lived in Vietnam. We did those things because we made the choice. Yeah. Well, the feeling is mutual here. So, but that's just so exciting about it that it wasn't because I had all the resources. It was because I had the vision. And once you have the vision, the resources show up. You look for them. You're training your mind to find them. And that was the thing I think you were saying as well with your book. You go, okay, I'm going to write a book. And then you said even, you had a word for it, a certain type of vision. It was when you decided that it was going to be a 6-figure book. You said, I need to get a
6-figure book deal?
Yeah, you said a 6-figure, you called it a certain key, like a key.
Like a keystone goal or something?
Yeah, keystone
like that,
goal. Yeah, you called it a keystone goal. So you said, okay, I'm going to write a book. So what's the goal of that? And so then you went and started reverse engineering. Okay, if I want a 6-figure book deal, what does that take? And you start asking people what it takes.
That's what allows you to actually have a process to actually do. Like, if you don't have a goal, you can't have a process. And if you don't have a specific process that leads to a specific outcome, then you're literally living non-intentionally. You're just going through the motions.
You're just saying, I wish I could go to Bali, and you could go, and that's the thing. Well, how much does it cost to go to Bali? What is the ticket? And go, okay, well, how much would that cost me? And then start working backwards. Is there a visa that I need? And you start to work those out, and then all of a sudden you have the steps and the path to get to the place you want to go. Or
you got to take risks. You got to take risks and have courage if you're going to take this path to life. You're going to have to be outside your comfort zone more regularly. You're going to have to try stuff that might not work. You're going to have to try stuff where you don't know what the full consequences are. I mean, every choice has consequence, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people don't want to deal with that. And so if you want to start living with intention, you're going to have to deal with more courage. You're going to have to deal with more uncertainty. You're going to have to get used to sometimes having things not work out the way you planned, and then figure out how to get there. But if you're willing to go through all of that, and through ups and downs and pain of learning, and also through joy of learning, then a lot more becomes available to you.
Yes. You guys, so as you're listening to this, the personality, who you can change to be, what you want to do, it is absolutely 100% your choice.
Your future self matters more than who you are today.
Yes. And you have so much power to do that, so much power to make those goals, to set those plans, to make them real. And as they've heard me say a million times, we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There is no someday. So there is no someday on the calendar. So someday you're going to go to Italy. No, you won't, because someday doesn't exist. But you want to make it real. You put it on. You make it real. It goes on a calendar.
Right?
It has a date. It has a goal. It starts to become and manifest as something truly, real. March is real. September is real. September 3rd is a real date. But someday does not exist. So this has just been so amazing, Ben, to have you here.
I love you. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the quote of Dan Sullivan, you know, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. If you put the date on the calendar, whether it's a marathon or a race, like now it's like now your future's immediately bigger. So it's like, okay, now let's get to the point of getting there, you know?
Yeah,
you have to have something you're working towards.
And that's the thing is when you go with I want this and it just kind of leaves at that, it's not going to happen. That's just a wish. And I think it's Robin Sharma says, a dream without daily action is just a hallucination.
Yeah, there's another version of that by a guy named Thomas Monson. He said that vision without work is daydreaming, but work without vision is drudgery. And so he said, but vision with work will win the prize. Yeah, that is but work without vision is drudgery. Who would want that?
Yeah. and there's a lot of it out there. You know, there's a lot, and that's the thing is we don't have to wish. You know, the circumstances, you know, Ben, I think as we touched on a little bit there too, is I think as people can hear and go, well, that's easy for him to say. He's a PhD in psychology. But you came from being stuck in the video games for 15 hours on the beanbag.
Tough background, a lot of trauma in my background. But I ultimately chose to be where I am. And that's, again, what Dweck says. Like, people who have a fixed mindset, they think that people who are successful or who have done something are different, that they're but people who are doing stuff with their life realize how ordinary they are. We're all freaking ordinary people, but you can choose to live a great life. You can choose to do extraordinary things. You can choose to have an amazing workout today. You can choose to really interact with your wife, like with your spouse and kids in an amazing way. Like, and it's just when you start to make choices and decisions in your life, then you can start to create cool outcomes. And it's worth the experiment. It's worth trying to make decisions and making commitments, you know, and actually doing stuff, you know. Then you can start to make cool stuff happen. Yeah. It's really worth it. And you can create an amazing life. I mean, you're evidence of that. I'm evidence of that. I have a great life, but I know it's going to be better. My future's going to be bigger than my past.
I'm not stopping.
here. But I look at my life right now and I'm super grateful and really appreciative. So yeah, it's something that I encourage everyone to do is make choices about the life you want to live and the person you want to be. You can do it.
Regardless of your past or present. You get to do it. You get to reframe trauma. Huge. You get to become confident. You can overcome the limiting patterns. You can learn how to redesign your environment to create your future. All of these pieces are right there.
It's powerful when you all put all these ideas into practice, where you choose a future self that's specific. You set a specific goal that's so beyond your current capacity, and you then put these things into practice so that you can actually figure it out and become that next person. I mean, you know, if you're not in that process, then your present isn't that good because your future's not that big. So I would invite people to set an amazing future self goal and then apply the principles to get to that level and watch yourself evolve, and then look back over the last year or two or however long you've been doing it and be shocked. Yes. You know, as Elaine Day Button would say, you know, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. I love how different I am versus the person I was that launched Willpower Doesn't Work 2 or 3 years ago. My life is totally different in so many different ways, but also how I approach things is totally different. I'm far more of an essentialist, to be honest with you. There's so many things I'm not willing to do. And I'm also so much more confident in the things that I choose to do. And so it's fun to look back on your former self and realize, holy cow, I'm a totally different person, which is freaking awesome.
Yeah. Because that's we should always be growing and always changing. And as you guys know too, I mean, these things that Ben was saying, you know, looking at where you want to be, looking at how you want to set up your environment, making these choices. What is the true motivation? These are all the worksheets we have for you all the time, completely free, everything. So you can actually dive into this kind of work. So we have the uncovering your deepest motivation, setting an environment to win, creating your roadblock plan, really making your goals become something so real and really creating everything around you. Because as Ben has been saying, you know, that personality comes with context. Those that goals that you set are really who create who you are, you know, and you are a product of what's around you, of your environment, not your circumstances. And you can set that up. You can set that up to win.
You need to. Yeah. You got to create and control your environment, or else it will create and control you. Yeah. As Marshall Goldsmith says, you got to design your life. You got to design your environment. Or else you're just being shaped randomly by whatever's coming in.
Yeah, it's going by default. Yeah.
Don't randomly evolve out there. Design your evolution.
That's the t-shirt we need. Don't randomly evolve.
Don't do it, because think about it, the internet, like, there's that Zig Ziglar quote that your input shapes your outlook, and it's like, if you're just going to just go off of what the internet, we recently watched, like Huckleberry Finn, which was kind of funny but Mark Twain's awesome. And by the way, he was teaching anti-racism like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But he talks about how everything that's popular is wrong. You know what I mean? And when you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And like, if you're just consuming mainstream media, if you're just scrolling the news feeds, then what that means is that your input is very average material, producing a very average mindset, producing very average aspirations, producing very average behavior. And so you need to be very intentional about where you're going, and also the inputs that you're allowing into your life: food, information, people, experiences. And then create and curate amazing experiences. I mean, if you're shaped by the experiences you have, the most amazing people are having the most interesting experiences. And so why not create a lot of amazing, interesting experiences in 2020? Like, that's in your future. You can create and design crazy, cool experiences that shape and enhance your life, even on a daily basis. Going home, and even this morning, having a peak experience, just whatever experiences you want to create. What is the normal life you want to live?
Yeah. What do you want? I mean, my morning, this year, it's always changing too. I'm learning Czech this year. I'm moving into.
I love that. That's so cool.
I'm taking my language. I'm singing, which I never thought I wanted to do. But I just decided, I'm going to go for it. I'm not saying it's, and this is the thing I love, is that I don't have to choose and go, well, this is going to be a career. This is going to be something, but I've always wanted to try it. I'm gonna have a plan to try it. And so now there's a plan together for me to incorporate in my life. Where will it go? I don't know, but it becomes interesting. It becomes that thing that just is another facet of me, because I chose to, instead of, I always wish I would have learned how to sing, knew how to sing. I wasn't innate. It's still not innate. I'm looking at my microphone. It's still not innate. But
you could get really good at it.
Yeah, but it's
you could throw yourself out there. You could start doing concerts.
Yeah.
You could start
No,
doing
I made a goal.
videos.
I set a goal that by the end of the year, I'm going to perform at one of the local cafes here.
Do it.
Yep. I'm going to, and I'll send you guys the video. So no, but those are the kind of choices we get to make, guys. It doesn't have to be so giant, but they can be like the bigger, but start with something, and you'll start to see it becomes addictive. Like, you're just like, if I can do that, I could do this. And what about that? And then like that list gets big and exciting.
Life becomes pretty fun.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we'll close up on that, because that's really what it's about. So Ben, thank you so much for being here. And I mean,
I loved it. Always love being with you.
Yeah.
Grateful that we could do this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank all of you guys for showing up to design your best life. If you try out Ben, and Ben, actually, before we wrap up, I'm so sorry, before we wrap, can you please tell everyone where they can find you, to make sure they know where to get that book, how to connect with you?
Yes, the book is Personality Isn't Permanent, total deep dive into destroying the myths and explaining a lot of the really cool science and just common sense on how to create an amazing life. But yeah, you can get the book anywhere. If you go to benjaminhardy.com, there's all sorts of cool stuff, free checklist on how to create your future self, free 20-minute training on how to literally like the steps to do it. So Benjamin Hardy is my website, and go get the book wherever you want. It'll blow your mind. Get the book
everywhere. There's some TED Talks you have out there that you can listen to. There's always some sort of new kind of program or find a freebie out there that they can download. One of his top articles, 8 things to do before 8 a.m. That'll get you going if you're contemplating the morning routine as well. So but really check out that book, guys, and then after that go back to the book before, Willpower Doesn't Work, is also a real powerful one that will work with some of those things that you want to try to do. And all of these things give a lot of action steps. And that's what I love, as that's the big thing on the show here, is we want action. Ben will always give you action steps on how to put these things into practice and not just theory. So you can really have transformation when you experience these kind of things with him. So that is amazing. Thank you so much. And if somebody, if there's one thing that someone can do, they can do this week to get started on any part of this route, what's an action step they could take?
Get a journal, pull out a journal. If you don't have one, give yourself 30 minutes and just write a freaking bulleted list of where you'd like your life to be in 3 years from now. Like that's, 2 to 3 years, you choose. And just write, just give yourself the freedom to imagine and the freedom to write without worry about what you think, about what you worry about other people thinks. That would be a first step. And then, because it's really an imaginative process. And then think about the things that you truly would love to see happen. And then if you've got the courage to, I would encourage you to start telling people about it. Because if that was to become a reality, then there's no hiding it, right? Right now it's in your head and you can hide what's in your head. But if it actually were to be a reality, you wouldn't be hiding it from anyone. And so the first step of stop hiding it is start telling people about it, telling people about your goals and aspirations. And then obviously making that a part of your day-to-day life. The more time you could spend working towards your future self, the more intentional your day-to-day life will be, and the more purposeful and meaningful it will be. And so the more time you can spend actively working towards and creating outcomes that you want in your life, the less your life will be on default and autopilot. And so yeah, tell people about it and then start actually doing it. Maybe removing the inputs from your environment that are stopping you. Courageously take some steps and you'll be shocked at the momentum you can quickly create.
Yeah. And that all starts with just, you guys, piece of paper, little book, and a pen. Just start
I did it today. I loved it. I wrote about where I want my life to be at the end of 2020, and I'm super excited to go for it and try it. And you know what? If I fail, who cares? Because I'm going to eventually get there. And so like, it's literally, why wouldn't I try? Why wouldn't I try to create crazy, cool things in my life?
Right. And you get to journal every day, so you can come back to it and go, how did that go?
I love it. To me, it's essential. Yeah, to me, it clears my mind. It clears my emotions. It helps me think clearly. It helps me know what to focus on. It helps me know what decisions to make today. It gives you some time to hear from your brain, because it has a lot of information you're giving it. And sometimes we need to shut up and let it talk. And the journaling is a great way to do that. Exactly.
So absolutely. Well, you guys, so get on that, get the journal, start with it. And you can see, as he explained, it just starts to avalanche from there to looking at the steps, telling people about it, making it real, and then moving forward. So do that and then go get his book. And to paraphrase him, don't limit yourself by who or what you've been. You don't have to be limited by what other people say you can have or achieve. If you want to be more confident, creative, like we said, or extroverted or organized, bold or powerful, you can become any and all of those things. And this book can help show you how. So you can discover the myths of personality that limit most people's potential and decide for yourself the life you want to live, regardless of the past or present. Become emotionally flexible, reframe traumas. We said all of those things, guys. So again, Ben, I just keep thanking you over and over. Always so much fun.
I love it.
And you guys, again, thank you for showing up to create your best life. And if you do try Ben's tips, please let us cheer you on, and you can let us support you. You can tag us at Benjamin_Hardy_PhD, which we'll have here on the screen, or at My Design Life Show, and let us know that you're trying your journal and you're testing it out this week. And you can always connect with me at Tanyamfk and at My Design Life Show on Facebook and Instagram. If you like this episode and you want to see more, make sure to click that subscribe and follow button and be notified when our next episode is up. And you can learn more about our workshops, courses, retreats, and coaching at tanyamfk.com. So remember, your someday starts today. Make it the best. I'm Tanyamfk, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. You can catch us every week at 1 p.m. EST live on the My Design Life Show Facebook page and on YouTube at the Tanyamfk channel. See how the challenges go by following us on Facebook and Instagram at My Design Life Show and at Tanyamfk. Do you have a method, tip, or hack you'd like to share or explore? Submit to be a guest or suggest a topic by visiting mydesignlife.show.